Welcome back to another episode of the Growing Space podcast. This week, I am going to share with you 10 tips for building raised beds. This feels super timely. We are smack dab in the middle of February, which means we are just a few short weeks away from the official start of the 2024 planting season. It's a very exciting time of year. If you are brand new to the Growing Space podcast, I would encourage you to go back to some of my earlier episodes, give them a listen. I just wrapped up a whole mini series on talking about spring plant families. So all of the different crops and edible plants that we can be thinking about for spring, and gave some special considerations for growing those plants at home in the next couple weeks. So go back and give those a listen after you listen to today's episode, all about 10 tips for building raised beds this spring. All right, let's get started. Welcome to the Growing Space podcast. I'm your host, Farmer Erin, owner of the Patio Farmer, and I believe that no matter what size space you have, you can grow food at home. Tune in every Tuesday as I share my best tips, tricks, and encouragement for tending to homegrown edible plants. I'm here to support your food growing journey. The Growing Space podcast is sponsored by Plant Club by the Patio Farmer. Plant Club by the Patio Farmer is a monthly subscription service I started in 2020. It's a membership-based opportunity to take your growing journey to the next level. With 4 different membership options, you get to decide the amount and kind of support that's right for you. All Plant Club members receive access to my online community through a platform called Circle. Having access to this platform allows members to share pictures, ask questions, celebrate harvest, and get to know each other. All Plant Club members also have access to free seeds each month, along with information on how to plant and tend to their crops, with seeding instructions and downloadable resources from the Patio Farmer's Resource Library. Membership starts at just $14 a month. Join Plant Club today by visiting my website, thepatiofarmer.com/membership. So I mentioned at the top of this episode that this topic feels especially pertinent for this time of year. As it's the middle of February, my consultation calendar is just getting filled up every week, which I absolutely love. I love making new friends and seeing new client spaces and talking about all of the wonderful options for the growing season ahead. And a primary topic of conversation that I cover in consultations is adding new space. And usually this takes the form of raised beds, although sometimes clients are more interested in container gardening. As you might imagine, with a name like the Patio Farmer, I do have a lot of clients who grow in containers, but I have even more clients who grow in raised beds. Especially new clients, when they reach out to me, they're interested in setting up raised beds. So I thought this would be a fun little introduction to the idea of building raised beds and getting a new growing space set up for yourself. So I just wanted to share 10 quick tips for building raised beds. You can use this list as a jumping off point, as an opportunity to do some more research, but this will be a nice little guided introduction to the things that you need to keep in mind when you're adding raised beds at home. So if you're really interested in this subject, maybe you'll consider scheduling a consultation with me to talk more specifically about your space. I can meet in person or virtually for consultations. So if you happen to live in the greater Charlotte area, spoiler for the newbies, I am based in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you live in Charlotte, I am happy to come to your home. And if you do not live in Charlotte or you live outside of the greater Charlotte area, then I'm happy to meet via Zoom. So I will put a link in today's show notes if you're interested in scheduling a consultation. I would love to talk more about your specific growing space. I am sharing with my Plant Club members, my monthly subscribers, This month, I'm sharing a more in-depth write-up about building raised beds at home. If you're interested in joining Plant Club and getting access to my full write-up on starting raised beds or building raised beds at home, plus get access to all of the other resources available in my online resource library, then also check out the link in the show notes for today's episode for more information about Plant Club and the different levels of membership there for you to consider this spring. So, the Patio Farmer's top 10 tips for building raised beds. Here we go. So, the first thing when you are considering raised beds for your space is to find a space that gets at least 6 hours of sunlight. This is oftentimes the most difficult thing to alter or the most inflexible component of finding the right space for a raised bed is your sunlight. All of your edible plants are going to need a minimum of 6 hours of sunlight every day. Full on bright sun. It's not dappled. It's not slightly shaded. It is full sun. There's also no such thing as too much sun for your space. So pick your sunniest spot and make sure that it has at least 6 hours of direct sun. So that's the first thing. The second tip for building raised beds at home is to try to find an area that's relatively flat. This isn't like a super hard requirement, just makes your life a little easier if you're able to put a raised bed on a flat surface versus having to worry about creating a level surface, and it just saves you a couple of steps. So if possible, finding a nice flat surface to put your raised beds is the second tip that I want to share with you today. The third tip for considering where you want to build your raised bed is making sure that you have a water source nearby. The smaller the space that you have, then probably the closer a water source is going to be. But if you are blessed with a large piece of property, then just keep in mind where your water is and how you're going to get water to your raised beds. You know, those of us who are brand new to growing food, we sometimes forget that watering is going to be an essential task to maintaining our plants, and it's something that you're going to have to do pretty frequently, sometimes every day, sometimes every other day. So making sure that you have a way to get water out to your plants in a streamlined, easy, convenient way is best. Okay? So those first 3 tips, finding a space with at least 6 hours of sun, a space that is relatively flat, and has a water source nearby, those are all very important things to keep in mind as you're thinking about where in your space you want to add raised beds. So the next 3 to 4 tips for building raised beds are all related to the actual construction of your beds. So I like to pass along to my clients when I'm talking to them about building raised beds that when it comes to the frame of your raised bed, there's tons of different options out there, but what it really comes down to is making sure that your raised bed frame, so the structure that's holding the soil in, that you're going to plant all of your delicious fruits and vegetables and herbs, making sure that one, it's made from something that's high quality, that's going to last as long as you want it to, right? So whether that's a handful of seasons or a decade or more, you know, making sure that it's a high quality material for the time frame that you have in mind. And then also making sure that it matches your aesthetic, something that you like looking at because you're going to be looking at it hopefully all the time. So the fourth tip that I have to share with you is to choose your aesthetic that you're looking for. Some of my clients, they like to build raised beds that match their homes. Some of them have specific design elements or ideas in mind, and you can find raised beds that match just about any aesthetic you have. A lot of people think about using wood to build their raised beds, and I'll get to wood in a second. But there's also options for building raised beds out of vinyl or out of galvanized steel, even like corrugated metal. The corrugated metal look is really in right now, and I'm not going to lie, I am a fan of the corrugated metal raised beds. You can also use concrete blocks, which I'll get to in a second because I am slightly obsessed with using concrete blocks for raised beds. But it really is about finding the look and the feel that is going to suit you and suit your built environment best. Okay? So that's number 4 is choose your aesthetic. Now, tip number 5 is related to wood. So if you are committed to using wood to build your raised beds, then I would highly encourage you to choose cedar as your wood of choice. And the reason for this is because cedar is a natural hard wood, meaning it has resins that occur in the material naturally that help keep it preserved and help maintain its structural integrity over time. Any wood that you use to build a raised bed eventually is going to deteriorate and break down and require additional maintenance and support from you, or it'll just simply need to be rebuilt. Now, cedar typically has a shelf life of about somewhere between 10 and 15 years. So cedar is more of an investment. I also always recommend that if there are two things that you really splurge on when it comes to your growing space, it should be your containers or your building materials and your soil. So splurge on cedar. Trust me, use cedar. It's going to last you much, much longer, and it's not treated with any harmful chemicals or, other things that can leach into our soil and leach into our food, like pressure treated wood sometimes can. I say that, but I also have clients who use pressure treated lumber for their raised beds, and they're totally fine with it, totally comfortable with it. So another one of my favorite phrases is to find what's going to work for you and find what's going to work for your space. So if pressure treated lumber works for you, then great. The 6th tip for building raised beds at home is going to be consider concrete. Just hear me out, okay? I have 10 raised beds in my backyard, and 2 of those raised beds are made out of metal. And the rest of them, the other 8, are all built out of concrete blocks, specifically concrete masonry units or CMUs. Most of us think of these blocks as being cinder blocks, but that's actually an incorrect nomenclature for them. They are concrete masonry units. Cinder blocks actually have like cinder or like rebar reinforcement that runs through the block. Concrete masonry units, on the other hand, are concrete blocks. You can find these at any big box like hardware store, like Lowe's or Home Depot. They have them by the pallet all the time. And these are what are typically used for building home foundations. And one concrete masonry unit is 8 inches wide, 8 inches tall, and 16 inches long. So you only need 20 blocks to build one 4x4 by 16, so 16 inches tall by 4 feet wide by 4 feet long raised bed, 20 blocks. And they're usually less than $3 a piece. So if you do the math, for $60, you can build yourself a concrete raised bed. So concrete masonry units are super economically friendly, super budget friendly. So if you are like me and you are building lots of raised beds, maybe you'll consider using concrete masonry units. 2 of my favorite things about using these, and it's just like a shameless plug for this method of building a raised bed, but 2 of my favorite reasons for using these. 1, concrete does not rot. It does not lose integrity over time. And second, is that they are hollow on the inside. So if you can just imagine this with me, right? It's a concrete block and you have essentially two 8x8 squares that are cemented together. And so they have like a middle dividing section, and then there's two hollow pockets in each block. What you essentially have once you've built your raised bed, no matter what the dimension is you have these little pockets all along the border and perimeter of your raised bed. I like to fill these little gaps with like green onion, or sometimes I'll do like spinach or radish, or flowers like marigolds or nasturtium go in there. Sweet alyssum, oh my gosh, is one of my favorite flowers to companion plant with. And so I use those little pockets as opportunities for companion planting, and I am just obsessed with them. Now, they are concrete blocks, so if that doesn't really jive with your aesthetic, I get it. For me, once I have plants growing in the beds, I barely even notice the frame. So again, it's all about finding what's going to work for you and what's going to work for your space. I love them because they are durable and cost effective, and I can do a lot with them planting wise. So that was the sixth tip. Consider concrete. Now, number 7, your 7th tip for building raised beds is to keep in mind the dimensions of your bed. And really, I just want to speak to 2 dimensions here. One is the height of your raised bed. So you want your raised bed to stand at least 10 inches tall. You can go taller, which in effect is deeper, give your roots more space, but 10 inches is the minimum that I would do. Now, most of my raised beds are somewhere between 16 and 18 inches, and I like that as a sweet spot. But, the thing to keep in mind with the deeper or the taller your raised bed is, then the more soil you'll need to use to fill the bed, which of course increases your startup cost, right? Now, the other dimension to touch on here is the width. When you're considering the width of your raised bed, consider your own, I'm using air quotes here, consider your own wingspan, or how far you are able to comfortably reach in, reach across to work the very center of your raised bed. For most people, a width of 3 to 4 feet is sufficient. If you have to put a raised bed up against a structure where you can't be on the other side of your raised bed, you may also want to choose a shorter width so that you're able, you don't have to like put a foot in your raised bed or lose any space just because of how you're able to access the full growing space of the raised bed. So the 8th tip for building raised beds at home is to consider your existing growth. So this is assuming that you have a space in your yard where there's grass or maybe some other plants that are currently growing. We're assuming that's where your raised beds are going to go. So before you fill your raised beds with soil and plant them with tons of fresh seasonal veg, you want to make sure that you have that existing growth or whatever is currently growing under control before you add fresh, delicious, nutrient-dense soil. That way, as you're growing, you're not getting grass or whatever else may be growing in the soil beneath your raised bed from growing up into your new bed, right? There's 3 different ways that you can work to control or manage your existing growth. The first one, and just remember, find what works for you and find what works for your space. But the first option is to dig out 4 to 6 inches of soil underneath your raised bed and kind of inset your raised bed frame into your native soil before you fill it with fresh soil and plant for the first season. Now, this is going to require some more muscle, but it does give your plants access to the native soil. Some people really like the idea of their plants being able to dig into their native soil. Yes, even the Carolina clay, dig into that and access the nutrients that are just found naturally in the ground. So if that sounds appealing, maybe you'll consider that. Another way of giving your plants access over time to the soil that is underneath your raised beds is to layer cardboard in the bottom of your raised bed to help suppress the existing growth and compost in place and give your plants roots access to that natural soil underneath the raised bed frame. Make sure you put a lot of cardboard in, like at least 3 or 4 layers of cardboard in the bottom of your raised bed to help to suppress that existing growth. And over time, that'll break down and your plant's roots will have access to the natural soil. Another way of managing existing growth is to put down landscape fabric in the bottom of your raised bed. So just line your raised bed frame with landscape fabric. Landscape fabric is effective because it keeps things from growing up, but it also keeps things from growing down. So it is a true barrier. The landscape fabric is usually a little easier, a little bit more straightforward than the cardboard or having to dig out the top few inches of soil. But, just like with everything, it comes with pros and considerations. So just keep those in mind as you're finding what's going to work best for you and your space. The 9th tip for building raised beds at home this spring is to use good soil. Yes, goes back to what I was saying earlier about really investing in your space, especially when it comes to the materials that you're using and the soil. And I have a feeling that I'll do a whole episode on soil here in the very near future. Ideally, for a raised bed, you'll be using raised bed soil. Or you could use potting soil or a potting mix. You wouldn't want to use like a topsoil or something that's meant for amending the soil, like a compost. You want to use an actual raised bed soil. You can get bulk soil. So if you're putting in multiple raised beds, then bulk soil from a very trusted, well-respected landscape company in your area might be a good option for you. Just make sure that you feel 100% confident that what you're getting from a landscaper is a good product and it's right for a raised bed. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But like I said, if you're interested in learning more about soil, then stay tuned because I have a soil episode that I'm lining up for this spring. Your 10th tip for building raised beds this spring is to keep them planted. So we have walked through how to find the right space for your raised bed, the different considerations there. We've talked about different considerations for your materials and your aesthetic and how to prep the area, how to fill the beds with good soil. Once you have all of those things in place, make sure you keep them planted, especially if you live in the Southeast, because here in the Southeast, or really the southern part of the US, and honestly, like wherever you're growing food, there are multiple seasons throughout the year in which you can plant food. There's usually always something that you can be either planting or tending or harvesting from your space. So once you have your raised bed set up, that is a semi-permanent space dedicated to you growing food every season that you choose and supporting your growing practice. So I hope those 10 tips for building raised beds this spring were helpful to you today. I have 2 exciting things to share with you before we close out. One is, I don't know if you have seen this yet or not. I've been sharing it on my social media, so on my Instagram, Facebook, in my newsletter as well. But I created this little quiz, and it's called What Food Should You Grow at Home? And it's a 10-question multiple choice quiz. So the 10 multiple choice questions are going to ask you things about sunlight and, how much time you have to dedicate to your plants each week, some other key characteristics and traits. And then the quiz will tell you what crops are ideal for you to grow at home. It was really fun to build this little quiz, and I love seeing like what people end up with as the crop that they should grow at home. So if you're interested, I will put the link for that in today's show notes. You can also find it linked in my bio on social media and on my website, thepatiofarmer.com. Also, as we are getting close to the spring season, I am about to open up my spring shop. Yes, my online spring shop is going to go live later this week. So make sure you keep your eyes peeled on my website for updates for the online spring shop. This week, it's going to have all of my spring seeds loaded up. You can shop and order directly on my website. Again, I'll put a link for that in the show notes. But seeds can be shipped anywhere. So no matter where you are, you can shop my seed collection. I will be adding plants and some other materials and supplies later this month. Those are unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you are, but those are only available for people who live in the Charlotte area. But like I said, the seeds I can ship just about anywhere in the US. And if you have listened to this podcast before, then you know at the end of every episode, I like to close out with a little fun fact, a little tidbit. So today's fun fact and little sign-off tidbit is all about cicadas. I don't know if you heard, but around this time last month, there was a big flurry of information out in the news streams about the cicadas and this year's rare double brood event. So let me just fill you in on this. So cicadas, if you aren't familiar with these, they are very common across the US. Cicadas are noisy little bugs that, for the most part, remain underground. And underground is where they lay their brood nests, or where they lay all of their little baby eggs that take a really long time to mature and become full-formed adults. When they're adults, they emerge from the soil to eat and mate and do whatever else a cicada does in its lifespan before returning back to the soil to lay their young and do whatever a cicada does within the soil. So these extended periods of time can range from 7 to 17 plus years. And this year, we are going to be blessed with 2 emergences of cicada broods. So this year, we have a 13-year cycle brood that is going to emerge from the soil and a 17-year cycle brood that's going to emerge from the soil. This is a super rare phenomenon. The last time it happened was 1803. So over 220 years ago. And it's going to happen again this year, bringing billions, estimated billions of cicadas to the US. Now, cicadas, of course, are herbivores. So support your farmers and keep them in mind this year, especially as they're dealing with this natural phenomenon. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Next week, we'll be talking about our spring to-do checklist and giving you some other nuggets of information to get you ready for the spring season ahead. As always, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the Growing Space Podcast. I hope that you learned something new and that you were able to take this new information home with you and implement into your growing journey and into your growing space. As always, I am here to support you and your food growing journey. If you'd like to learn more about the different services and resources and membership programs that I run through the Patio Farmer, please check out my website, thepatiofarmer.com. You can also follow me on social media. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and oh my gosh, most recently, TikTok. Wow. I know. Here I am. Patio Farmer is on TikTok. It's very exciting. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a like or a rating or a review if you want. Maybe share a little comment about your favorite part of the episode. Share it with a friend. The more interactions I get with my little podcast online, the more I'm able to help people just like you in their food growing journeys. As always, thanks for being here, and I will see you again next week.